I'm Billy S, welcome back to the channel. Last week I took a look at the bosses of Another Crab's Treasure, and you all really enjoyed that video. So this week, we're taking a look at the areas of Another Crab's Treasure. For anyone new to the channel, I do boss and area rankings on the various Souls and Souls-like games, so it only makes sense to give Crab Souls that same honor. There aren't a ton of explorable zones in the game, but they make up for that with a rather large game world that has a ton of depth. Platforming and exploration are the pillars of this game after all. I also want to commend Aggro Crab on developing a game where I actually enjoyed every zone. Usually there's one area that ends up being infamous or irritating, but at least from my personal experience, I had a blast from start to finish. And please note that I won't be including areas like Trash Island or the Edge of the Drain, as they're just backdrops for boss battles as opposed to areas themselves. So let's not waste any more time, all 8 Another Crab's Treasure areas ranked. Let me know your favourite location down below. At number 8 we have New Carcinia, the hub area of the game. In this sprawling reef city, you'll come face to face with all your new companions for the rest of the game, the crypto bro Firth, the ancient curator Conch, everybody's mother Nema, the evil duo of Roland and Inkerton, and most importantly, the one who stole your shell, Prawnathan. The city itself is surprisingly vast, with an upper and lower crust to explore, and a decent amount of hidden collectibles and umami crystals to find. From a new adaptation if you run into this NPC a bunch of times, to being able to upgrade your fork, to hiring new stowaways, and the most important part of any young hermit crab's adventure, Among Us insurance. Being able to buy shell insurance, allowing me to respawn with a shell of my choosing, is such a brilliant little mechanic. There's also a brief bit of gameplay on your way to the town, as you have to cross a series of platforming challenges in the nearby coral reef. I like that you can explore here initially for rewards, and then come back later once you've got the mantis punch to access a few hidden areas with some better loot. It's all colourful and well designed, so many visual gags hidden throughout that I won't spoil in the city. Just remember to grapple that F key above the insurance place when you arrive. I forgot to do this and missed out on that shell for the entire game. The only downside to this area is that aside from your main cast of characters, all of the side NPCs are exactly the same across the whole game. I kept checking with the upper crust crab who fell in love with a lower crust crab, hoping to see a little resolution to their storyline, for the gays, you know, but it never happened. I prefer my hubs and my Soulsborne games to have more dynamic NPCs whose stories progress over the course of the game, and it made the hub feel less alive as a result. Still a great area. I'll never forget the first time seeing New Carcinia, turning the corner to see the town hadn't loaded in. Beautiful. At number 7, we have The Shallows, the opening area of Another Crab's Treasure. It's here where Krill will learn to harness his powers to prepare him for the true quest ahead. From your humble tide pool, you're drawn down a linear path in search of your shell, coming into contact with gunk-infested crabs until you obtain your fork, precious protection. I had to laugh when I entered the main fields of the Shallows, only to be immediately attacked by the first NPC I talked to. It really set the tone that nobody was on Krill's side, and made slaughtering the wildlife for microplastics a little bit more justifiable. What I like about the Shallows is that, sure, you can head to Slacktide, do the quest that leads to the Moon Caves, come back, beat Magister, and move on. But why not instead go to the right of the starting area to challenge the Royal Shell Splitter, or going through some sandcastles to take on a rather large crab at the end of a narrow chasm, or after obtaining the grappling hook, lassoing your way up to various castle structures that were previously inaccessible. None of these areas are required to go to on your journey, but they each come with their own challenging enemies, umami crystals to obtain, and better loot including health upgrades, microplastics, and stowaways to make your journey a little easier. There was so much to see and do. I was always noticing a new fishing hook to grapple to, or an item off in the distance that I couldn't reach. The main path is pretty fun too. The moon caves are a great introduction to the grapple hook and your shell spells, with some well-hidden platforms requiring a jellyfish elevator to reach. But even just the concept of getting to the moon caves via swinging across rotted, rusty pipelines was genius. It's the way Another Crab's Treasure manages to meld the undersea beauty of the ocean with the pollution of man-made structures that really impresses me. The designers of this game are absolute wizards. The only part of this level that lets itself down for me is the revisit to Fort Slacktide. While taking the main path up the castle walls is fairly simple, anyone looking to kill every enemy and collect every treasure will have to fight a plethora of tough battles in the courtyards, but with the level geometry and how cramped everything felt, I and my opponents were prone to various glitches. Getting stuck inside towers, seeing enemies unable to pathfind due to the gunk and rubble, stuff like that. This area as a concept is super fun, and story-wise I really love it, but compared to the rest of the game, it just felt way buggier than the rest. The Shallows overall is a great open playground to get used to Krill's abilities, but it's ultimately a very standalone portion of the experience. Even just having the moon snail make a comment or two about the story as Krill journeys further into the ocean would have been enough for me to connect all of these areas together, but the Shallows are so disconnected from the rest of the game that it lends itself to what many would consider to be a very, very slow startup. It's why I'm hoping we get a New Game Plus down the line so I can blast through it the next time we play. At number 6, we have Flotsam Vale, the equivalent of the From Software Poison Swamp trope. This mining quarry has been fully overcome by the pollution of the gunk, and yet crabs are being sent here to work all for the greed of Roland. When we arrive, the music sets the tone, a melancholic workplace that nobody wants to remain in. What I like about the area is how it always gives a lot of routes for progression. The first half of the swamp sees you needing to reach a cavern on the far side, but how do you get there? That's up to you. Do you follow the left bank, hopping over a few bits of broken wood? Do you head to the central island where a series of pistol shrimps stand ready to fire at you? How about climbing up some unrelated cage netting, or having a brief chat with Chiton before continuing your journey? The second half of Flotsam Vale is arguably even more open-ended, as you can choose to head to the right half, unlocking a series of shortcuts on your way to the underwater cavern in the upper right, or do what I did, head to the upper left towards the docks and clear out the circular wooden platforms surrounding a nearby mini-boss, before sneaking over to a fresh moonshell spawn point. There's machinery to activate, gunk to avoid, a ton of unique enemies to face, including the introduction of enemy hermit crabs, which definitely made me jump. Or how about the multiple paths leading to and from the Expired Grove? There's one leading to the caverns near the Curdled Village, and the other that you can take one way to reach Flotsam's hidden boss, the Consortium, one of the best fights in the game. The only part of Flotsam Vale I think was a bit too tough was the cavern leading to the mailbox where the treasure was. I personally think there should have been a warp point outside of the cavern, as having to make your way across the entire Flotsam Vale swamp after every death got very tiring very quickly. Especially as the cavern had some pretty tricky enemies to defeat and played around with going above and underwater, which changes how Krill's platforming works. Obviously, if you make it to the Ceviche Sisters, you'll be fine because you can respawn near them, and you can unlock a shortcut if you rush through, but I lost a lot of time in this area. I actually wish the game was willing to play with Krill going above water more often. It's not something that happened more than a handful of times, and I think it's an aspect of gameplay that could have been expanded upon. Ultimately, Flotsam Vale was a really fun poison swamp with some great new enemies to take down, but I'm not surprised. Platformers lend themselves really well to the poison swamp gimmick. At number 5, we have The Sands Between, a beautiful pun on Elden Ring's The Lands Between, a location that separates New Carcinia from the Expired Grove and Flotsam Vale. I absolutely adore this area, as it really captures the essence of being deep in the ocean. Nothing in sight, just endless water and sand. Some would say it's even a peaceful existence, if it wasn't for the horror that is Pagurus the Ravenous appearing any time you try to cross the glossy expanse. You're warned to stick to the marked life rings, as Pagurus cannot approach them, and because of this you're forced to make mad dashes to the next point of safety, maybe grabbing an item or two on the way if you think you can make it. Having a Resident Evil Mr. X style boss that harasses you and doesn't leave you alone is genius, because it hurries you along to your next objective while leaving you the promise of coming back to take this guy on when you're stronger. Naturally, this means a large portion of the player base killed Pagurus before going to the expired grove, because that's just what happens. Good for you, but for me, I wanted to experience the game the way the story intended, and that meant running for my life a bunch. Which worked out, as after defeating Topoda and gaining his Mantis Punch, I felt ready to fight Pagurus, which ended with me succeeding, and from there, the Sands Between was open for exploration. Now, I'd personally wait until getting Voltai's adaptation, as it's required for unlocking various side areas, but the amount of hidden content in the Sands Between is staggering. Tons of platforming challenges hidden behind Mantis Punch blocks and electrocute switches. There's an entire Highlands area with its own moon shell for you to set up a base camp with. There's a big reference to the Crab Rave, as you can find a boom box with various crabs dancing around it, complete with a disco ball shell to equip. And perhaps most infamously, you can head west to the Bobbit slopes to get the Bobbit Trap adaptation. I won't lie, I absolutely hated the Bobbits because I didn't have the reaction time to avoid their traps and kept getting my shell nommed. I also had this false idea that there would be another area to the west, because towards the start of the game, the NPCs warn you not to head west, you don't want to know what's out there. So finding out it was just a small slope of those sandworms was admittedly a bit underwhelming. A Bobbit boss could have been a great alternative, as it makes more sense than stumbling upon the adaptation at the top of the hill. The Sands Between was so much fun to come back to each time I got a new power-up, and there were so many hidden nooks and crannies to explore. A real Metroidvania vibe, if I do say so myself. Plus, I hope I'm not the only one who found a reference to our favourite cartoon character who lives in a pineapple under the sea, Bob Esponja. Anyway, before we leave the Sands Between, I'm trying to get my channel to 35,000 subscribers by the end of the year. If you enjoy this video, consider helping me out, and if you want to go that extra mile, you could also become a channel member. It's $4.99 a month and gives you early access to future videos, and a shout out at the end of my videos and in the description. It's the best way to ensure I can keep making videos on games like Another Crab's Treasure, so thanks for listening. At number 4, we have the Bleached City, the final zone of the game, and what a reveal this was. Going from the darkness of the Unfathom, I was expecting to go somewhere even deeper, even more ominous, only to open up to desaturated grey skies, a surprisingly somber bit of area music, and the ruins of an ancient civilization. While the rest of the zones revel in their wildlife and their exploration, the Bleached City was a march towards the game's conclusion, sending Krill down a fairly linear pathway with only a few alternate areas to explore in the first half of the zone. I jumped out of my skin the first time I experienced the Denture's shell and realizing I had a whole new host of dangers to worry about. The first time seeing the crabs of this area molting was also rather horrific. It felt like I was going from killing these zombies to killing a newborn. Definitely gave me a lot to think about. Now, I was admittedly worried on the bridge to the main city, as I felt this was the worst part of the level. The accuracy of the archer crabs was on another level, and every attack inflicted me with a status effect that, once built up, would sap my shell's health. It was pretty frustrating, but getting past them to the next moon snail spot was enough to alleviate my concerns. The city itself was the best part of the level, as you're exploring these crumbling ruins, which makes it very easy to hide hidden pathways and side content as you go. The enemies here are the hardest the game has to offer, meaning you need to take every combat encounter carefully, use your adaptations and shell spells to gain an edge and slice them up with your fork. It's not always clear which way is progression versus optional content, but it's easy enough to explore each path and backtrack. I just wish I hadn't gone so crazy trying to get this one snow globe on this rafter when I found out some hermit crabs later in the game had the same shell. I appreciate the platforming challenges on offer. The path to reaching the knight's helmet was the toughest by far, and yet I wanted more. Also, the grim reveal that Father Levy, whom we met multiple times throughout the game, made it to the Bleached City only to fall victim to the same fate as the people here. It was dark and twisted, but I like that this random side character got a resolution. All of this leading to the main cathedral, which is such a clear homage to Anor Londo, the devs even made the joke themselves in their last April Fools. I did panic run to the last Moonshell spot with a lobster knight chasing me down, and I was very lucky to survive the encounter. And then, after defeating Kamcha, it's down to the bottom of the drain. The music here was honestly really uplifting. A gorgeous melody that kept me wanting to push to the treasure at the end. So of course, finding out it's an emotional, dramatic cover of the fucking Crab Rave song while scripting this video was absolutely wild. While many Souls-likes tend to fail at making their final areas feel climactic, I think the Bleached City really succeeds. Its focus on vertical exploration and a ton of combat allows the player to flex with all their upgrades and skills they've learned on their journey. I just happen to vibe with some of the early areas a tad bit more. At number 3, we have Scuttleport, the electric power plant connected to Flotsam Vale. Upon collecting all the map fragments, we're told to explore Scuttleport to obtain a way to power our boat, so we can catch up to Roland. More than any other area though, Scuttleport is the platforming level of the game. A series of large vertical towers lifting up into the sky, where the best way to get around is to equip a metallic shell and get lifted up via the magnet lifts. Many of the puzzles in this zone revolve around needing to collect electric plugs so you can connect them into their relevant sockets, which will power up the facility to get you access to the next part of the level. I honestly wish more of another Crab's Treasure focused on puzzle solving via your shells. It was fun having to really think about what shell I'd need for a particular puzzle, and realizing I wouldn't be able to rely on my old faithfuls to get me through each encounter. It meant avoiding combat if I wasn't certain my shell could handle the fight, while finding the most efficient routes around. I love the new enemies that use electricity here. While I got the rubber band early, which negated their attacks, for the brief moment while I was vulnerable, they gave me a real run for my money. This one building where I had to drop down into the trash heap below to retrieve the spark plug was probably the most fun, taking me from the lowest depths to the highest peaks in mere moments. So many perilous battles on thin walkways, various moments where I had to climb netting along the sides of towers to make progress. I do wish we had more than the urchins as obstacles for those netting moments though. Having an enemy that maybe moves vertically or horizontally along the nets, giving the player more reason to use their attacks while climbing, could have been cool. I also feel we could have gotten some really tricky platforming via those magnet lifts. Something tells me there's just untapped hardcore difficulty platform potential just waiting to be unleashed. I also like this area for Firth's development. He starts to realize that Roland is actually a bad guy, but it's surface level as we can tell he still idolizes the man and is failing to understand what the true problem is. In a game that's trying to be a Souls-like and a platformer, I'm just glad that one of the zones decided to go full platformer on us, really challenge that aspect of the player's moveset to show that we've got a full grasp of Krill's mechanics. Although I did have a few moments where I'd fall back to earlier areas and rage, but that's normal for platformers. I've played Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy, I know true pain. The only downside for me was the boss fight at the end. Voltaire just isn't mechanically balanced, she's far too easy and far too passive despite having a really cool concept and great childlike voice acting. It makes the level end with more of a whimper than a bang, but that doesn't erase the fact that flying across the towers with magnet lifts, avoiding electricity, and grappling my way to victory was just a really fun time. At number 2, we have the Expired Grove, the first major zone you explore on your quest to find the treasure of the cereal box. Compared to the Shallows and the sands between, the Expired Grove is this kelp jungle of pollution and tragedy. Many of the characters talk about how the village here was once a kind place filled with wonderful crabs. only for them to now be corrupted by the gunk. You're dealing with dangerous archers who can two-shot the player in the early game, hidden bush crabs, and other enemies we're used to at this point. What I like about the Expired Grove is how, while it's more dense than previous areas, it still has that element of exploration. There are various hidden nooks to find collectibles, a Bloodstar limb behind a small waterfall, an old whirl protected by the archers, or how about the milk carton buildings and treetop pathways that tempt you, whispering, "You'll be able to get here later." Past the diseased lycanthrope, you reach a polluted river that you have to follow upwards. Behind a waterfall is another hidden boss, and throughout the riverbank there are enemies and items to collect on the way up, only for it to be revealed the oily river is due to a giant oil drum that found its way down here. Pollution has never felt so blatant as when you're climbing up this oil drum, realizing that the crabs here did nothing wrong to fall to the gunk. How can you protect yourself against something you know nothing about? All of this leads to a really cool slide down the other side of the barrel, leading to Aaviier on his wooden boat. The first half of the Expired Grove is a journey through pollution, and you can't help thinking about what this place would be like in its prime instead. The second half of the Expired Grove is a different experience, as you have to get through the Curdled Village. Here there's a single crab sniper who was a seriously fun challenge to get past. He doesn't respawn, meaning once he's slain, you can explore the village at your leisure, and behind him is a gate that opens out to Aaviier's arena so you have a shortcut. So many extra goodies to find and crabs to defeat. Now, you're in search of the village elder, whom I was certain would be a gunk boss that had fallen completely to pollution, but as you rise up the cliffs, the world gains back a bit of colour. Everything looks and feels a bit more healthy. Love this room with the 2 lobsters that I explored for collectibles, by the way, a great challenge even if I had to initially flee so I could continue making progress. Eventually, you find Chiton, who warns you of a powerful creature up ahead, and instead of a polluted monster, you're met with Grovekeeper Topoda, a mantis shrimp who succeeds in absolutely beating you to high heaven with his insane moveset and sultry voice. He's the perfect reward for players going off the beaten path to explore the Grove further, as I've seen comments from players who beat the game that never found the Grovekeeper in their playthroughs. And him being able to upgrade my adaptations was the cherry on top. Letting me mantis punch my way across the treetops of the earlier part of the Grove on the way to the Consortium was another highlight, as I love finally being able to reach areas that tantalized me prior. There's nothing else to say. The Expired Grove is just an extremely solid location that showcases the themes of the game and its gameplay to a really high level. But there's one zone for me that just barely beats it out. At number 1, we have The Unfathom, the depths of the drain, an undersea trench where the light from above no longer reaches. The first time we fall here, we're encompassed by darkness, stumbling forwards until we find Firth lamenting the uselessness of the treasure we sought to find. Thousands of dollar bills. The irony is not lost on me here. What I wasn't expecting was a very real storyline to emerge, with Krill losing his will to live, and instead being pushed on to survive by his companions. Nema's conversation with Krill about how if he can't go on for himself, at least go on for the survivors so they can make it back to town, is really hard-hitting and a very complex issue I wasn't expecting this game to tackle. There's no right answer to that type of conversation, and I think it was handled wonderfully. Then we're let loose into the Unfathom. No way to warp out, lost in the inky darkness as we acclimate to our surroundings. The downside to this area is that there's no way to level up until after you've beaten Patroc, so if you've come here underleveled, I won't deny that you'll likely have a really tough time. For me, lighting the glow sticks and slowly piecing together the landscape was pretty fun. It was sometimes hard to tell where I had been and where I was trying to go, especially as I had no idea what to expect moving forwards. Monstrous-looking barracudas swarmed me as I progressed, small sand mites attempted to latch onto me and sap me of my strength, and God forbid I deal with another anglerfish anytime soon. genius disguising them as items to collect on the ground, but I found their grab to be extremely unfair, as the anglerfish will straight up just continue to run at you endlessly until you get close enough for it to finish its grab animation. Probably my least favorite enemy in the game from a mechanical perspective. But that's fine, because we also have one of my favorite enemies in the game to balance it out. The Silence brand crabs. Yes, Aggro Crab took inspiration from all the memes, and the second half of the Unfathom, after you've unlocked a moon snail shell, is filled to the brim with gigantic crabs that can fire lasers at the player via the power of telephones. These guys were terrifying, and I learned pretty quickly that I'd have to use stealth to get through the latter half of the level, as they were just too plentiful to attack head-on. Their grabs are deceptively tough to dodge, but felt fair, and taking one down was like overcoming a tough boss. But when I realized they respawned, I went pacifist all the way, darting between rocks before I got blasted, unlocking fresh shortcuts to make travel time easier, all the while checking every mound or corner for items. I was exploring the unknown. I was exploring the unfathomable. All leading to an epic boss battle against Inkerton in the bones of a large fish, while he bloodborned the house down all over me. One of my favorite aesthetics for a level being lost in the deep ocean, it's a genuine fear of mine, and overcoming that to press on here was something special. I don't expect everyone to love the Unfathom like I do, it just hit my personal buttons, and for that, it's my favorite area in Another Crab's Treasure. And that's my list. Which area is your favorite? Let me know down below, and be sure to parry that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all of my future content. Once again, thank you Aggro Crab for an amazing game. There will be a link to the Steam page down below for anyone interested. My social medias are on screen now. Feel free to follow me if you're comfortable. I recommend my Twitter or my Discord. I would personally go with the Twitter though, it's the safest option. And a massive shout out to all of my YouTube channel members. Thank you so much for your support, it means the world. It's $4.99 a month. You get early access to my videos and a shout out here and in the description. It is so worth it and it really helps the channel grow. Thank you for watching, I'll see you next time. Adios.